If you like listening to Warriors in Their Own Words, check out our other show, the Medal of Honor podcast. The link is in the show description. I'm Ken Harbaugh, host of Warriors in Their Own Words. In partnership with the Honor Project, we've brought this podcast back at a time when our nation needs these stories more than ever. Warriors in Their Own Words is our attempt to present an unvarnished, unsanitized truth of what we have asked of those who defend this nation. Thank you for listening, and by doing so, honoring those who have served. Today, we'll hear from Corporal Chuck Miller. Miller served as a tank loader and eventually a tank commander in World War II.
I went in at 18, just had turned 18. I went in February of 43. Well, I joined the 3rd Armored at Saint-Jean-de-Day, France. I had, in England, I'd been in the replacement pool, and I was detached to a 48th Ordnance Battalion, and we waterproofed a bunch of tanks and took them to Normandy. I landed, before the 3rd Armored did, I landed 9 days after D-Day. And I worked the beaches, picking up ordnance supplies, driving a truck for about a couple of weeks. And then finally they got the replacement pool set up, and I was pulled right out and sent. The 3rd Armored finally landed and had their first action and needed replacements, and I was about one of the first replacements. And that was in Saint-Jean-de-Day. Well, the tank commander initially orders everything, and generally it's over radio. You're wearing a helmet with earphones in it and intercom, and you hear them tell you the gunner to lay on certain, and he estimates the range, everything, and then they tell what kind of ammo you want to use in the 75, whether it's HE or AP or APC, and we load. The gun loader loads whatever shell they tell to put in there, and then he lays on the target and fires, and then of course that shell comes out, and I have to. We start firing. Generally, if it's firing at a tank or anything that's armor, we use an AP or an APC, and so that I continue to load that shell. But and of course the 30 caliber machine gun is mainly just to get range, get range or hitting the infantry are hanging around, and I had to keep loading that too. Well, keeping the tank with whatever ammo you're going to use, and of course then if you get in a real hot battle, you're going to have the turret floor covered with shells. And you have to, whenever you get a chance, you have to eject those out the porthole on the side. They have a porthole there. In that early tank that I was in, that first tank, only had one hatch on top, and that was the tank commander. So there's only, all 3 of you had to go out one hatch on the top. And so there was no way you could get rid of them except out the porthole. But you had to keep your ammo in order. And generally, if you ran out of the rack, up your rack, you had to get it from either in the sponsor or from the assistant driver had a rack behind his seat, and he had to turn around and bring hand shells up to you through the basket. They're fairly heavy, but I really couldn't tell you how much they weighed now. But of course, when they got the 90s, that was quite a bit heavier shell. But I never had to mess with one of those because I was never in a T-26. We had one per company, and that was just the one that Bob Early had at Smix-Moyer. We had 3 main 75 shells, which was the HE, which is the high explosive, and the AP, which was the armor piercing, and then the APHE, which was they would pierce and then also explode. So, of course, the 30 caliber was we had every so often they had tracers in those, but unless you happen to hit on the side or in the back, or if they were up at an angle where you could hit them underneath, you couldn't penetrate with them. Even when we got the souped up the 76, when they come out with a 76, it still wasn't effective. And until we got the T-26 with a 90 millimeter, we were just dead ducks, just about, if you fought tank to tank. We were interviewed in Cologne by a lady correspondent, and it was in all the papers back home. And it said that when she asked us about the tanks, and I remember Bob Early saying our tanks weren't worth a drop of hot water on stove. And they said, chimed in Corporal Charles Miller, says it make us feel real bad to think our people at home think we got the best equipment when we know we haven't. We knew we didn't have the best equipment. The only thing you could do is hope that you got the right shot at the right time and could penetrate. And that is until, let's say, we got the T-26. And, of course, with its 90 millimeter and our armament. Now, the thing, we could move our turret 360 degrees. And our tanks moved faster. We had more maneuverability. You could outmaneuver a German tank, and they didn't have 360 on there. They could only turn so far with their guns. It was around January sometime, about the 7th of January. We were moving from Grand Sartre, Belgium, to Sartre, Belgium, and we were going in line across the field. And the first thing that happened, we hit a mine, and it flattened 2 bogies and took the rubber off a number of the treads. But we were able to keep going. But then we got further in, and we were, as I remember it, we saw a tank beside a barn in this edge of this town, and that's what I was laying on. When we got a shell, all I knew was a flash came down in front of my eyes, and a shell came right and took a hole, about like that, out of the cupola ring, threw the hatches open, and took my tank commander's head off about right through there. And then went on back and took the anti-aircraft gun off, and of course he fell down on my back, and I didn't know what was going on. Of course, normally when you got hit, they got your range and they hit you to your burn. And time I could look around, my assistant driver had bailed out. The loader had gone through the hatch and out his hatch, and finally got the tank commander off my back. Bill Hay was his name. And I crawled out, and we had a basket on the back of the tank built on where we kept a duffel bags there and carried back there. I was planning on rolling off of it onto the back of the tank and down. And I'd done something that I had trained never to do, was leave the gun turned to one side or the other. And when I rolled off, I went clear to the ground. Of course, the snow was yay deep, about 2 feet deep, and it broke my fall. And I scurried. They were shooting the 30 caliber. They were shooting machine gun fire all around the tank, and I was able to crawl around the back of the tank. And when the tank started backing up, it almost ran over me. Then I realized I had left the gun over the driver's hatch, and he couldn't get his hatch open. So that was something. It was a no-no as far as I'm concerned. But I had goofed, but they left it in power traverse. So when he started backing up, it jiggled around, and the turret come around, and he was able to open the hatch and come out too. But I ran with the rest of us. We ran down to a a little stream there, and went up this bed stream. And I got back to where the other tanks were, and everybody thought they was trying to get the medics because I thought I was hurt, because I was just, of course, my back and everything, I was just solid blood from Bill Hay. You shouldn't, but you just lose it all there for a minute there. You just don't know what's going on, and all you can think about is getting out of the tank. Maybe I should have taken control and kept firing the gun, but when you hit like that and you have somebody dead on your back, all you can think about is just getting out of the tank. The only thing we had was when you rode in the tank was you had a crash helmet, what we call a crash helmet, but that was mainly for banging around, so you didn't hurt your head. But as far as protection, no, there was no protection. You just wore your regular clothes, and so there's nothing different to protect you. I don't know exactly how to explain it, but everybody was for everybody, and you stuck together, and you knew that guy was going to be there when you needed him. Each crew member knew what their job was, and they were trained to do it, and they did it. I don't think I was ever in a crew that I had any a problem with each one of the members doing what they're supposed to do. Oh, I lost a lot of friends. Yeah, as far as just the immediate tank crew was Bill Hay, of course, and then at Blatzheim, Germany, when we were going on the Cologne Plains, which they told us that was the tank country, we were really going to be. First thing that happened that day was that we were lined up, and they to pull out of this at a line formation from the edge of this town going into Blatzheim. And there was a bunch of slit trenches out they wanted cleared out, and they sent the B company was generally worked with us, they're a light tank company, and they sent their M5s out there to clean those out, which they did, except they were all knocked out, the whole platoon, just one after another, before they could even do anything hardly. And then they gave us we were supposed to not move out until on our left there was a farmhouse out there, and all the buildings out there, and there was a bunch of a unit of Tiger, or I don't know whether Tiger, but anyway, a German unit over there, and F Company was supposed to be over and take care of them before we moved out. They gave us the order to move out, and as soon as we pulled out, they said, "So stop," says that hadn't been taken, pull back. So we pulled back, and so then when they finally said, "Well, that's taken, go," we pulled out. Well, they knew exactly where we were. The Cologne Plains weren't where it wasn't good tank country after all, because their anti-aircraft guns, or their 88s, which was dual-purpose anti-aircraft or tank, they had them dug in the ground and had camouflage nets over them. And you'd look out there and you couldn't see them anywhere. And they'd fire and you wouldn't even know where it's coming from. And they started hitting our tanks, and we lost. I don't know how many we lost when we first came out, and we finally threw all the smoke we had. We had that's another round we had. We had a smoke round, and we threw that, and then we had a little mortar is built up in the side of the turret, and we'd fired all our smoke mortar shells out of there, and we came back, and then they got another company with us. F Company then came with us, and we had more tanks, and we went out and went on across. Except we got about halfway across the field, and our driver didn't see the bomb crater, and we ran right off into a bomb crater, nose straight down. And what happens is when it turns over, like you got all this stuff in there sponsoring your tank, and all that stuff fell out on me, and I had to get it off me, and then it was my responsibility to turn off the main power switches, which was behind me. By the time I got all that done, the whole crew had bailed out, and I was the only one in there. But I got out, and as soon as I got out, I could see why they bailed out, because we couldn't have got out without a maintenance T2, what is called a T2, to pull us out. And I climbed up out of the hole and found the rest of the crew laying on the ground behind a big. The Germans used to dig their potatoes, and they put them in piles and cover them with straw and everything. And they were laying behind that pile of potatoes, and I laid down right next to my tank commander, and the rest of the crew was down at my feet. And there was another crew of F Company. I've never known why I knew it was F Company, but I've always said it was F Company. They were just a short distance from us. They had lost their tank and was out on the ground, and we got a shell come in and hit them right in the midst of them. And I can still see this fella getting up and starting to run, and dropping to his knees and turning around, looked like he was looking back for help. And he didn't have sign of a face. He was his whole face was gone. And that same shell, when it hit, I didn't know it had hit Jupe. Ray Jules was his name, laying next to me. And I told Joe, who was a driver, I said, we ought to get out of here. Let's get away from this area, because there's a lot of infantry walking across at that time, coming across the field there. So we got up, and I was getting up, and I nudged Jupe to get him to come, and he didn't move. And I looked, and he got a big hole in his head. He'd been hit, and he was dead. And Joe, he'd been hitting. He had a hole in his crash helmet where a piece of shrapnel had hit flatways, and he had a big knot on his head, and he was dizzy, and he had some shrapnel in his shoulder. But we got up, and I helped him, and he leaned on me, and we got clear back to the town we came from, the rest of the crew. And after we got back over there, I kept having trouble with my ankle. It kept something, it'd give way on me every once in a while. And I kept looking. I had overshoes on, rubber overshoes, 5-buckle overshoes over my boots. And finally, I undid them and peeled them down. Well, the hole popped open and I saw the blood down in my shoe. And finally, I took my boot off, and it was full of blood. And I'd gotten a shrapnel in my ankle. And that was it. But it was going inside in the ankle, and it didn't hurt except when I got, it was so small, the piece was, that but they took us back to Stolberg, to the medics in Stolberg. Took Joe and I back there, and they probed around and got the shrapnel out of his shoulder. But they couldn't get at it in my ankle, and they just probed around, put a Band-Aid on it, and sent us back. I went through the rest of the war with it, and then after the war was over, we moved back to a little town, Münster by Dieburg, which is close to Frankfurt. And I kept having trouble, and my ankle would give way with me at times, and especially when I wore boots. And so I finally went to the first sergeant and told him, I'm either let me wear low-top shoes and let's get that out of there. So they sent me back to the medics, and they took X-ray and found it. And I went to hospital in Frankfurt, and they removed it. And I was in the hospital about 10 days, but I have trouble with it now, but I just cut the tendons on 2 toes, but that was all. The next day after I was hit and Bill Hay was killed, the graves registration came up, and they removed the body. But they didn't have to do the cleaning up, of course. And we had to clean up the tank. Like Bill's brains were laying in my seat, and blood all over. We had to take all the shells out and wipe them down, clean the blood off of them, and the radio was covered completely with blood. It was gruesome, and I never even talk about it for years. And after I come home, I never even talked about it. But you finally get over it, and talk about it now. No problem. But for a long time, you didn't. It was in your mind all the time. You didn't talk about it. But when we got back to maintenance, have it work, have the tracks and the bogies and everything fixed, I found an old blanket and an old shoulder hat, and and some cardboard, and I traced my foot and made a pattern out of cardboard, and then I convinced to sew, and I made me some boots, which came up about halfway up my foot. And I did away with my boots because they was tight, and I just wore those in my overshoes. And that just made all the difference in the world. My feet, I didn't have trouble getting my feet getting cold after that. And also while I was there, I made a hood for myself. I took the shelter half and a blanket and made a square, and then cut it down and tacked it to my back, and kept my head warmer too. But this was, they weren't prepared for it, for winter over there. They didn't issue any warm clothes. We didn't have long johns or any at that time when we first went. In fact, I had sent home, my mother had taken some old track pants, the one with the elastic in the bottom ring. Of course, it didn't have a fly in it, so she put a fly in them for me, and that's what kept me warm. One night we was in this little town there, and we were building. We got out of the tanks for living and staying in these houses at that time. But I had one crewman, it was in my crew, started crying and just going on that night, and his feet were frozen. And I finally went up. I went to CP and borrowed the half track and come down, picked him up, and took him back to the medics. And in the medics, they just the rooms were just, the guys were laying on the floor. All of them had frozen feet and fingers, and we never did see this boy. He never did come back to us.
With the busy fall season already in swing, you might be looking for wholesome, convenient meals for jam-packed days. Factor, America's #1 ready-to-eat meal kit, can help you fuel up fast with chef-prepared, dietitian-approved, ready-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. You'll save time, eat well, and stay on track with your healthy lifestyle. Level up with Gourmet Plus options, prepared to perfection by chefs and ready to eat in record time. Treat yourself to upscale meals with premium ingredients like broccolini, leeks, truffle butter, and asparagus. Looking for calorie-conscious options? Try delicious, dietitian-approved, calorie-smart meals with around or less than 550 calories per serving. Need an extra boost to support your wellness goals and feel your best as you tackle a busy autumn? Try Protein Plus meals with 30 grams of protein or more per serving. With Factor, you can rest assured you're making a sustainable choice. We offset 100% of our delivery emissions, source 100% renewable electricity for our production sites and offices, and feature sustainably sourced seafood in our meals. This September, get Factor and enjoy eating well without the hassle. Simply choose your meals and enjoy fresh, flavor-packed meals delivered to your door. Ready in just 2 minutes, no prep, no mess. Head to factormeals.com/warriors50 and use code warriors50 to get 50% off. That's code warriors50 at factormeals.com/warriors50 to get 50% off.
Hello everyone, my name is Tom Kearns and I host the Anglo-Saxon England podcast, where I cover the history and culture of England from the departure of the Romans in the 5th century to the Norman conquest in 1066. So far we've surveyed the collapse of Roman rule in Britain, the migration of the Anglo-Saxons, and the history of Northumbria from its beginnings in the mists of legend to its destruction at the hands of Viking raiders in the 9th century. I hope you'll come and give it a go.
Actually, I was in the first tank, like I say, was hitting the Bulge, and the reason I got out of that was they made me tank commander. But then I was kid. I was the youngest. In fact, my driver was one of the old timers that had been in the unit since it had been started, and he used to kid me like a baby. He'd go out loot and bring me back dolls and stuff like that, and he didn't like the idea of me being up the tank commander. So he went first sergeant, says he didn't think so. Well, he said, well, you can be the first. It didn't matter to me. He said, you can be the tank commander. But I had a friend of mine who was in the first tank I'd been in. Gerald was the one that got killed next. He was a tank commander and he needed a gunner. So I transferred to his tank. And of course, then he was killed in the next action. And I went to another tank after that. And made it all the way through under that tank then, right to the end of the war. We had a liaison assigned to each company from the Air Corps, and they had a special radio where they could talk to their pilots. And he rode right along with us and communicated with airplanes when we were getting their support. And it was really good when you'd see one of those P-47s dive right ahead of you, and you'd hear a big bomb boom and go up where you knew, rest assured, when you got up here, there was going to be a tank laying on its side there, because they really did the job. The more you fired a gun, even though your tank commander was estimating ranges, you could knew after you'd fired and what that range was, and knew you could estimate it yourself. It's so much different now than like the tanks now. They have a laser and everything, which we didn't have. Everything had to be done by eyesight for laser, for estimating ranges. Well, now I don't think I would trade it for anything. I think to say I didn't enjoy it at the time, but I sure enjoyed the guys that I met and the guys that friendliness and everything, and say we still meet, and it's I don't know what it is about it, but we enjoy meeting and talking every year about it. You wonder what happened to some of these guys that you never heard from after the war, and you knew what happened to them, and of course there's guys that I've wanted to go see, and of course now they've passed away, and you'll never see them now, and you just wonder what you should have gone and back when you were younger and got together and enjoyed their company and everything. I don't know exactly how to put it other than what we went through and lived through it, and how close we were as a unit. The tank, the 5 men in a tank to start with, and of course in your platoon, 5 tank crews, and of course third of the company. Everybody knew everybody in the company just about. Of course, when you started getting replacements, a lot of times you didn't get too acquainted with them before something had happened, and so but a lot of those, they all made it through too, and you became good friends, and it just continued.
That was Corporal Chuck Miller. Thanks for listening to Warriors in Their Own Words. If you have any feedback, please email the team at kharbaugh@evergreenpodcasts.com. We're always looking to improve the show. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate and review. Warriors in Their Own Words is a production of Evergreen Podcasts in partnership with the Honor Project. Our producer is Declan Roars. Bridget Coyne is our production director, and Sean Rule-Hoffman is our audio engineer. Special thanks to Evergreen executive producers Joan Andrews, Michael DeAloia, and David Moss. I'm Ken Harbaugh, and this is Warriors in Their Own Words.
Hello everyone, my name is Tom Kearns and I host the Anglo-Saxon England podcast, where I cover the history and culture of England from the departure of the Romans in the 5th century to the Norman conquest in 1066. So far we've surveyed the collapse of Roman rule in Britain, the migration of the Anglo-Saxons, and the history of Northumbria from its beginnings in the mists of legend to its destruction at the hands of Viking raiders in the 9th century. I hope you'll come and give it a go.